Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest, Dr. Raymond Moody, who's here to share with us his new book, Proof of Life After Life: 7 Reasons to Believe There is an Afterlife. Have you ever wondered what happens to our consciousness after we leave this body? Well, today, Dr. Raymond Moody is going to share with us his groundbreaking work that combines nearly 50 years of afterlife and near-death experience research to provide proof of the existence of the soul and life after death. Dr. Raymond Moody coined the term near-death experience in his book, Life After Life. For half a century, Dr. Moody has researched some of life's greatest mysteries. As both a PhD in philosophy and an MD, he has had a strong interest in how medical realities intersect with the realm of philosophy. In his multiple roles as author, professor, public speaker, and grief counselor, Dr. Moody has heard thousands of accounts of near-death, shared death, and after-death experiences. He never expected that an interest in the afterlife would become such a focus of his life's work. It is my great honor to introduce Dr. Raymond Moody.
Well, thank you so much, Marianne. It's good to be talking with you again.
Well, thank you, Dr. Moody. What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. Throughout all of your work and the work that you continue to do you consider yourself a skeptic when it comes to near-death experiences?
Well, Marianne, thank you for that question, because I am a medical doctor and psychiatrist, but before that, I got a PhD in philosophy, and I was a philosophy professor. And I think probably a lot of listeners will, have probably interest in this area of research, and they probably kind of feel threatened by those so-called skeptics. But what I can tell you for sure is that the people who call themselves skeptics, who say, oh, I'm a skeptic about these near-death experiences, I think it's just the oxygen deprivation to the brain, those people have no idea what they're talking about. Because the skeptical philosophy, the point of it is to not draw conclusions. That's what it means. So if somebody says, oh, I'm a skeptic about this because I think it's just the chemistry of the brain, well, unpack that means I'm a person who doesn't draw conclusions, and my conclusion is such and such, right? But in terms of the general tenor of your question, I first heard about near-death experiences, Marianne, when I was 18 years old. I had not been raised religious, thank God. I was from the Deep South. And my dad was kind of a cynic about religion. But I just never even thought of the notion of an afterlife. It wasn't in my mental orbit. And so when I went to University of Virginia at age 18, intent on studying astronomy, I immediately decided to be a philosophy major instead, because in my philosophy class, I had my first year at UVA. We read Plato's Republic, which is about a near-death experience. It culminates in this astonishing near-death experience. And having never been interested in, or, I never even thought that the question of an afterlife was other than just like a comic premise, like in a Jack Benny movie I saw, or a cartoon. I had no idea anybody took it seriously. But I immediately became a hero worshiper of Plato. And the fact that he took this question seriously really woke me up to it. And I asked my professor, Professor Hammond, about that. And he said, yeah, these early Greek philosophers studied cases of people who were apparently dead, but revived. And that Plato took them as indicators of an afterlife. But meanwhile, Democritus, about the same time, the Greek philosopher, had figured out that things are made of tiny little bits called atoms. And so he said that there's no such thing as a moment of death. And in describing these stories, he said, what this is, he said, it's the residual biological activity going on in the body that is even after the body appears dead. And isn't it interesting? That's the same debate we have today, right? Some people take it seriously. Yeah, it indicates an afterlife. Other people say, oh, no, it's just the oxygen deprivation to the brain. But the trouble with that kind of way of looking at it is that, as we know very well, bystanders at the death of someone else who are not themselves near ill or injured, nonetheless have these experiences. Like as grandma dies, for example, the bystander might say, as grandma died, I left my body and I went up part way toward this light with her. Or people say that that the room fills with light. Sometimes you hear people say that apparitions of the dying person's dead relatives kind of come into the room. And incredibly, I have quite a number of cases over the years, Marianne, of people who were at the bedside of someone else who was dying. And as the person who was dying died, the bystanders had empathically co-lived the dying life review of the person. And several years ago, my wife Cheryl and I got a communication from an emergency room doctor. And he had read my thoughts about shared death experiences. And he was called to the ER to resuscitate a patient he had never laid eyes on. And he said, as this man was dying, he said, the guy's life review appeared around him. And so, this to me is probably the most unusual thing that I have learned, is that bystanders at the death of someone else may participate in their life review. One case I know, it was from a woman in Canada, in BC, British Columbia, and she saw her grandfather's life review when she was, I believe, on the way to the hospital, but she was not with him. He was across the, whatever, in a hospital, and she was not with him, but as he was dying, she saw his parts of his life review. So, these are just very unusual things that can't be computed or thought about coherently by thinking of this as oxygen deprivation to the brain, because the bystanders are not ill or injured, and yet they have identically this same experience.
That is just remarkable that these experiences are happening also to further prove the existence of life after life. Typically, when people ask you questions about life after death, what are they really asking you?
Well, I was a philosophy professor when I first became known for investigating near-death experiences. That was before I went to medical school. And by about 1970, I was getting to be known for this. And as I said, I was a philosophy professor at the time. And ever since then, Marianne, a sort of constant stream of nice folks have approached me with this same question. It's like, Raymond or Dr. Moody, like, is there a proof of life after death? Can we prove it? And when I first started being asked that question, I was a philosophy professor, as I said, and one of my favorite things to teach was logic. So when people would ask me about proof, my mind would go to Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein and Gottlob Frege, the founders of mathematical and symbolic logic. And I would respond in that way. Well, over the years, I began to realize that when I would answer that way, people's eyes would kind of roll up in their heads. And so what I finally figured out that they were asking, when people want to know, is there a proof of life after death? What it boils down to is this question, um, which is it a rational thing to expect and anticipate that when we die, our consciousness goes into another zone of reality? And I say, absolutely, yes, it is. Now, there may be a few people listening to this who, like me, are interested in logic and so on. And they will be aware of the enormous difficulties that are present in this quest to find a rational proof of an afterlife. I mean, there's just really enormous difficulties that were pointed out by people like David Hume, for example. David Hume was one of the great skeptics of history, and he lived from 1711 to 1776. And he greatly influenced Einstein, as Einstein himself relates. And David Hume pointed out that the question of an afterlife is not really commensurate. I mean, it doesn't fit in with the logic that we have. And so for those of you who are aware of that kind of difficulty, what I can say is that's been solved too. Because the main difficulty logically is that the notion of an afterlife, although it may bring pleasant feelings and images to our mind, really in terms of cognitive content that you could verify or confirm, there's none there. And so that has in the past been a major difficulty. But the new development that solves this is that we now know how to think logically about the things that don't make sense, that are unintelligible. Yet we now realize that there are depth formulas in nonsense and unintelligible discourse as well. So all of the big the big logical issues are dealt with. And so now I think we can get down to the emotional thing people want to know is they're looking for some kind of comfort and reassurance. And I say, yeah, we can provide that rationally now, no doubt about it.
Well, how exciting is that? I know in your book you talk about out-of-body experience, and I'd love for you to share what that is for people who are new. And how does that relate to proving that there's life after death?
Right. Well, in Greek antiquity, where I get started, because my main interest since I was 18 has been Greek philosophy and the development of Western thought through those events. The Greek philosophers, although we may think of them as abstract, when you go back to that world, the average person in ancient Greece, if you ask them what a philosopher was, they would say a philosopher is a person who probes into things up in the air, and that meant out-of-body travel, right? Or probes into things underneath the earth, which was a code word for calling up the spirits of the deceased, which is another thing the Greeks did. In that regard, the Greeks very early knew of a character called Hermotimus, Hermotimus. And he was around, say, 600 BCE, roughly. And Hermotimus was known for a talent for leaving his body and traveling to distant locations at will. And so from very early in the Western intellectual tradition, there's this people trying to cope with this out-of-body experience. Aristotle, 280 years after the death of Hermotimus, Aristotle mentioned him. So that's a measure of the impact that he had on the Greeks. Now, in terms of the modern world, it is a very common experience that many of our listeners will, be aware of, that people leave their body and they feel that they get out of their body, they can look from above, they can see their body down below, and so on. And this happens in a number of situations. Of course, everybody knows that it happens in a near-death experience. People whose heart stops beating will tell us that they leave their bodies and they can view the scene of the resuscitation from above. But this occurs also in other situations. Sometimes it just occurs spontaneously and nobody knows why it happens. It just suddenly they find themselves out of their bodies. But or sometimes in viewing art, for example, or some other kind of spiritual transformative experience like that. But a really fascinating wrinkle in this, Marianne, is that I have a friend in Paris, and his name is Eric Pagani. And Eric is very well known as a psychologist and who works on the main psychology journal there in Paris. But he's also a concert pianist. And I got to add also, because of my love for him, is that he's also probably his favorite job. He is the psychological consultant of Disneyland Paris. And like me, Eric grew up with the Donald Duck comics and so on. So, but Eric is just one of the nicest, most sweetest people I've ever known. And in 1988 in Paris, he was telling me about he had been playing a concert, and he said he was really wrapped up in the music, and suddenly he got out of his body and he went into a light, and 17 minutes later he came back to the piano having finished 3 pieces. and so and by the way, Eric is a very modest person, but his sister happened to be there with him. And so I asked Eric, I said, well, did the people seem to enjoy the music? And he said, oh, yes, they certainly did, kind of self-effacing. But his sister said, well, as a matter of fact, people were on their feet and jumping up and down and yelling. And so Eric, being a psychologist, said, well, if this has happened to me, it's happened to other performers. So he, having a lot of operatic friends in France, he interviewed them, and he found that a lot of his fellow musicians had this experience of seeming to leave their body and going into a light. And so he wrote a book about it, which unfortunately has not been published in the U.S., but it was a very wonderful book in France. So out-of-body experiences occur, yes, in near-death experiences, but they also occur in other kind of, sometimes just for reasons unknown, and then other times because of performing great music, for example.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Dr. Raymond Moody in regards to his new book, Proof of Life After Life: 7 Reasons to Believe There Is an Afterlife. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Are you an author, speaker, or expert who is looking for more publicity? Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up for free interview requests from shows looking for guests. Radio Guest List is the #1 free booking resource for radio, podcasts, and TV talk shows who are looking for experts like you right now. Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up today to get the visibility you deserve.
It's one thing to become attached to your perfect home, but what do you do when that home becomes attached to you? A family in dire need of a fresh start, a mysterious house tied to the past. Buried deep within the foundation of the old Far Hill Manor lies a centuries-old secret. Dark forces or something stronger just waiting to be discovered. Caretaker, a supernatural thriller by breakout authors R.J. Halpert.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed, and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest, Dr. Raymond Moody, who's here to share with us his new book, Proof of Life After Life: 7 Reasons to Believe There Is an Afterlife. So in your book, you talk about precognitive events. What is that, and how does that relate to all of this?
Yeah, well, one thing that people tell us when they leave their body and they go into this region of light, they say that time no longer exists and that they are in a timeless space. For example, hundreds and hundreds of people have told me about having their life review in which they see time stands still and they see everything they have ever done instantaneously in a review. And they witness the events of their life, not just from the perspective they had when they did them, but rather through the eyes and feelings of those with whom they've interacted. So if you see yourself doing an unkind act to someone, then in this review, you feel directly the sadness that you brought about in that person. Or if you see yourself doing a loving action, then you feel the good feelings. So, in these life reviews take place in a timeless state. And Eben Alexander, some of you may know, was a professor of neurosurgery at Harvard who had a near-death experience. And he's a very articulate and brilliant and super nice man. And so I said, Eben, here in this world, we orient ourselves by time and space. And I said, well, but in what they say is that when you go over there, there's no time and space. So I said, how do you orient yourself there? And he said, love and knowledge. And that's what it seems to be. So time seems to be something that pertains to this realm that we're in. This raises some, of course, it's psychologically, it's impossible for us to imagine that, right? But that's what people say when they come back. And in that state, since time dissolves, there doesn't seem to be a distinction between past and future. There's this wonderful man named Grant Rasmussen who was a friend of mine in Charlottesville. And Grant had a near-death experience when he was a young man. And he said he saw everything he was ever going to do in his life, a flash forward, like he saw all the major events of his life unfold when he was still very young. I've heard that same account from a lot of folks. So what I'm getting at here is that time, although, it's such a necessary part of our daily lives, in the big picture, it seems to be, well, I hate to call it an illusion, but something very similar, right? And so you don't have to be near death, though, to get into this state. For some reason, sometimes for reasons unknown, people just sort of seem to have some experience of seeing into the future. Very sadly, in 1970, early June of 1970, My then wife and I woke up in the middle of the night, both having the same distressing dream in which we were losing the baby. She was pregnant, and that it was a dream. And I simultaneously was I was dreaming the same thing, but from my point of view, I was dreaming that I was taking my wife down to the hospital, and we got into the hospital, and I saw a man from behind, the tawny brownish hair and the plaid shirt and the khaki pants, but I only saw him from the behind, and I understood that was the gynecologist or obstetrician. But the trouble was, she had been going to a group of 3, and that was not the one she had seen. But anyway, to make a long story short, the next night it happened just like it did in the dream. And when we went to the hospital, I saw that same. And so I'm talking about this not to be autobiographical, but because I'm sure that a lot of folks listening to this will have had similar kinds of experiences. So time seems sacrosanct when we're here, and yet it's not the feature of reality as that we commonly suppose it to be, I think.
I want to say how sorry I am for your loss. I can't imagine what you and your wife at the time went through. That must have been just really, really difficult. The information we're talking about, I find to be very interesting how this all comes together. In your book, you talk about out-of-body experiences that you've documented and afterlife experiences that you've documented. In many ways, you've proved that there is life after life for those that may consider themselves to be skeptics.
Well, I think that we are in a state of world history now, Marianne, where we can begin to get some definite information on that. And what I think this is going to boil down to is that there is or isn't an afterlife, regardless of what anybody may believe or not believe. You see, it's not dependent on what we believe. And where I am coming on into this is that I give up. I understand all the logical difficulties, and I understand the difficulty of making a logical inference that there's an afterlife. But where I am, I just give up. I can't think my way out of it. I knew even in medical school that these experiences are not oxygen deprivation to the brain, because one of my own wonderful professors, Dr. McCraney, told me my first year in medical school that she had this experience, not when she was almost dead, but when she was trying unsuccessfully to resuscitate her mother. She got out of her body. She saw the light. She saw her mother there in spirit form, and saw relatives and friends of her mother's who had died sort of emerging from this tunnel. And so, it's for many people, it seems to be a threatening thought that there's an afterlife. Very often, in my experience, because they had some sort of terrifying fundamentalist religion crammed down their throats when they were a kid, and became terrified of the notion of hell. So when they give up the afterlife, they don't want to think about it anymore, because they think of hell. Everybody has their own notion, I guess, about the afterlife and their feelings to it. But what I'm getting at is that regardless of what people think the Bible says, or what their preacher told them when they were a kid, or regardless of what people who falsely dub themselves skeptics, who don't even know what the word means, and who tell us that this is oxygen deprivation to the brain, regardless of all those people, as I gather, there is an afterlife. Now, at the same time, I want to say I wouldn't try to persuade anybody else of this, but I also think that there is open now to transform our minds in a whole new way, so that when we do have a near-death experience, we'll be able to talk about it in a new way. Marianne, you're old enough to have seen this as I have. To me, it's the afterlife is kind of coming down and infusing with this life. And let me explain that. People have known about near-death experiences from antiquity. Plato talked about them. Democritus talked about them. So they have always occurred. So why is it that it's in this period of history that suddenly this is gathering all the publicity? Well, the reason is, in my opinion, beginning in the 60s and 70s with the advent of cardiopulmonary resuscitation technology, which was unheard of before. And now there's a cardiopulmonary resuscitator in every department store, right? Well, what that brought is that what was once an extremely rare and uncommon experience suddenly became very common. And so that is why I am hailed as the founder of the near-death experience thing. I got it from Plato, right? But the reason why it made the sensation it did in 1975 when my book was published, you see, is that by then, this was a common enough experience that practically everybody knew somebody who had been through this. It's shortly after my book was published, I got this letter from a psychiatrist, and he said that he was reading my book on an airplane, and he said he noticed the lady kept looking over there, and so the lady sitting next to him. So then he sort of looked, and she said, "What is that book about?" And he sort of began to tell her, and then she interrupted and said, "And let me finish." And she told him her experience. And see, I mean, that happens all the time, that if somebody wonders about this, then all they have to do is to ask around among their own friends and relatives, and they'll be able to find somebody who can tell them, on a first-person basis.
It seems that this topic, along with being evergreen, it doesn't matter where we are politically or religiously, once someone has that personal experience, it stays with them forever.
Yeah. What I say it like this. I talk to God every day, and he has never said a word to me about religion. I mean, I suspect that if God wanted me to be religious, he would have given me some indication by now. And what I have observed about religion is that very often, I think that people use religion as a way to avoid a personal relationship with God. Right? It's, I just talk to God every day like it's a friend, but it's some people. It's like they just get so scared they want to hold on to some ideology that was pounded in them when they were a kid or whatever. But conditions in the world are changing. If you go back to remote antiquity, you would probably have to talk to 1 million people before you could find somebody who had been to dead and recovered. Nowadays, you just talk to several people, talk to a couple of dozen people in your neighborhood, and you've got several cases right there. So that's the difference. See, what was once extremely rare is becoming an everyday occurrence.
My goodness, Dr. Moody, it has been such an honor to spend this time with you. Thank you so much for being on the show with us here today.
And thanks so much to all the folks listening in, too. Just really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Raymond. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Proof of Life After Life: 7 Reasons to Believe There Is an Afterlife. Proof of Life After Life is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. Make sure to visit Dr. Raymond Moody's website at lifeafterlife.com. There you can learn about all of his other amazing books, be part of his community, and watch his videos. He's got some really great videos that you want to see. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.